Most corrupt Louisiana State Prison. Inside Angola Prison, there's a prison in America so large, so isolated, so feared, that men sent there don't say they're serving time. They say they're going home to die. This is not a metaphor. This is not exaggeration. This is a documented reality. Welcome to Louisiana State Penitentiary, known by one word alone: Angola. A prison built on the ruins of a former slave plantation. A prison surrounded by rivers, swamps, and miles of open land. A prison where over 70% of the population will never be released. But Angola's reputation isn't just about life sentences. It's about violence, unchecked power, corruption, and a system that, for decades, operated beyond the reach of the law. This is the story of how Angola became America's most corrupt prison, how guards became executioners, how inmates became enforcers, and how the state of Louisiana allowed it to happen. This is inside Angola Prison, a prison built on blood. Angola is not just a prison. It is 18,000 acres of land, larger than the island of Manhattan. But long before it housed convicted murderers, this land served a different purpose. It was a slave plantation. The name Angola comes from the African country where many enslaved people were stolen from and forced to work this soil. Men, women, children, they picked cotton under the sun. They were beaten. They were worked to death. And when slavery officially ended, the system didn't disappear. It evolved. After the Civil War, Louisiana needed labor, and the prison system provided it. Convicts, most of them black, were leased out to private companies. They worked the same fields, lived in the same shacks, died at the same rates. The plantation simply became a prison. From the very beginning, Angola was designed not for rehabilitation, but for control. No way out. Today, Angola holds over 6,000 inmates. More than 70% are serving life sentences. No parole, no release dates, no second chances. Inmate slang for Angola is simple: the farm. Because inmates work it: fields of corn, fields of soybeans, fields of cotton, all under armed supervision. And escape? Almost impossible. 3 sides of Angola are surrounded by the Mississippi River, the fourth by swamps and forests crawling with snakes and alligators. But the real barrier isn't nature. It's what happens if you try. For decades, escape attempts ended in death, not investigations, not trials, just a silence, when guards ruled like gods. For most of the 20th century, Angola operated with virtually no oversight. Guards were underpaid, undertrained, and given absolute authority. What happened inside Angola stayed inside Angola. Beatings were routine. Torture was whispered about, but rarely documented. And inmate deaths were almost never questioned. Former prisoners would later describe guards who used clubs freely, fired warning shots into bodies, forced inmates into brutal labor regardless of injury. One former inmate testified, "Inmate voice. They didn't see us as people. We were just bodies they controlled." But the most disturbing truth? The guards didn't even do all the violence themselves. They outsourced it. The Trusty system legalized terror. Angola perfected a system that would later shock the nation. The Trusty system. Certain inmates, often violent offenders, were given authority over others. They carried weapons. They enforced discipline. They reported directly to guards. In exchange, they received privileges, extra food, better housing, power. This was not unofficial. This was policy. Trusties were allowed to carry knives, clubs, and in some cases, guns. And they used them: rape, extortion, murder, all under the approval or willful ignorance of prison staff. If an inmate was killed, it was written off as inmate-on-inmate violence. Case closed, a place the law feared. For years, Angola existed in a legal black hole. Attorneys rarely visited. Journalists were denied access. Families were kept in the dark. Complaints disappeared. Witnesses were silenced. Evidence was buried. It wasn't until the 1970s that the outside world began to understand just how deep the corruption went. And when federal investigators finally looked inside Angola, what they found would change prison history forever. But exposing Angola was only the beginning, because the truth was far worse than anyone imagined. The walls began to crack. For nearly a century, Angola existed beyond accountability. But no system, no matter how isolated, can suppress truth forever. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, something unprecedented began to happen. Inmates started writing letters to civil rights lawyers, letters to federal courts, letters smuggled out through families, clergy, and sympathetic guards. They described a prison where violence was encouraged, rape was routine. Guards deliberately placed vulnerable inmates with known predators. Medical care was withheld as punishment. And most importantly, they described a system designed to break men permanently. At first, the courts ignored them. After all, these were convicted criminals. Until one case reached a federal judge who decided to look closer. The lawsuit that shook Angola. In 1971, a class action lawsuit was filed against the Louisiana State Penitentiary. The claim was simple and explosive, that Angola violated the Eighth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Cruel and unusual punishment. What followed was one of the most damning investigations in American prison history. Federal inspectors documented inmates armed with weapons provided by the prison, dormitories controlled entirely by violent trusties, guards who openly admitted they avoided certain areas out of fear. One investigator would later say, investigator voice, it wasn't a prison, it was a feudal system. The court agreed. In 1975, a federal judge ruled that Angola's conditions were unconstitutional. The trusty system was ordered dismantled. Weapons were confiscated. Federal oversight was imposed. For the first time in its history, Angola was forced to change. But reform came at a price. Violence without order. When the trusty system collapsed, something unexpected happened. Violence didn't disappear. It exploded. For decades, inmate violence had been controlled, not prevented, by empowering predators. Once that artificial order vanished, Angola descended into chaos. Murders increased. Assaults surged. Entire dorms became battlegrounds. Guards, long dependent on inmate enforcers, were suddenly outnumbered and unprepared. For a brief period, Angola became one of the most dangerous prisons in America, and the state of Louisiana faced a terrifying question. How do you control a prison built on brutality? Without brutality? Their answer would define Angola's modern era. Enter Burl Cain. In 1995, Louisiana appointed a new warden. His name was Burl Cain. Cain inherited a prison with shattered reputation, constant violence, and federal eyes watching every move. He promised transformation, order, discipline, redemption. Under Cain, Angola underwent dramatic changes. Violence statistics dropped. Educational programs expanded. Religious ministries flourished. To the public, Angola appeared reborn. But critics would later argue something else was happening. That corruption hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed its face. Control through faith. Burl Cain believed religion was the key to controlling Angola. Inmate pastors were elevated. Faith-based dorms were established. Christian programming became central to prison life. Participation brought privileges, better housing, improved job assignments, protection. Non-participation often meant isolation. Civil rights groups raised concerns. Was religion being used as rehabilitation or as leverage? Former inmates alleged that Angola had replaced physical coercion with psychological control. That belief, not behavior, determined survival. And once again, lawsuits followed. The money trail. As Angola's image improved, money began flowing in. Donations, private funding, outside partnerships. But financial transparency was scarce. Investigators later questioned how inmate labor profits were allocated, how donations were managed, how Cain himself lived far beyond his official salary. In 2015, Burl Cain abruptly resigned. No press conference, no explanation, just silence, and then an investigation. A legacy of control. Angola today is quieter, more orderly, less openly violent, but its past still echoes through its fields. Thousands of men will still die there, still work land once tilled by enslaved people, still live under a system that values control above all else. The corruption that once defined Angola was never erased. It was absorbed, institutionalized, normalized, and yet the most disturbing truth about Angola is not what happened there. It's that it was allowed to happen for generations, in plain sight. Life means life. At Angola, a life sentence is not symbolic. It is literal. Men arrive in their 20s and 30s. They grow old behind razor wire. They die in the same place they arrived. Angola operates one of the largest populations of lifers in the United States. No parole hearings. No countdown clocks. No future outside the fence. This reality shapes everything. Inmates don't measure time in months or years. They measure it in decades. And when there is nothing left to lose, behavior changes. Some men turn inward. Some seek structure. Some become predators. Angola was never designed to manage this reality humanely. It was designed to contain it. Death row, the last stop. Within Angola exists another prison entirely. Louisiana's death row, a place where inmates live under a different clock. One that does not count upward, but down. For decades, death row inmates at Angola were held in near total isolation. Small cells, minimal contact. Years, sometimes decades, waiting for appeals to move. Some would die of natural causes before their sentences were carried out. Others would be exonerated. And a few, after years of waiting, would face execution. Angola's death row became infamous not just for punishment, but for how long the punishment lasted. The men who never left. Over the years, Angola has housed men who became symbols, not because of their crimes, but because of what the system did to them. Men who entered as teenagers and died in their 70s. Men who maintained innocence until their final breath. Men who educated themselves, taught others, and still never walked free. Some became jailhouse lawyers. Some became mentors. Some became warnings. Their stories circulated quietly, passed from cell to cell, reminders of what Angola ultimately was. A place where time did not heal. It erased. The Angola Rodeo. Once a year, Angola opens its gates. Families arrive. Tourists line up. Vendors set up booths. This is the Angola Prison Rodeo. Inmates ride bulls, sell handmade crafts, entertain the public. To supporters, it's rehabilitation, a chance for inmates to earn money, a rare moment of connection with the outside world. To critics, it's something darker, a spectacle, a prison profiting from the bodies of incarcerated men, on land once used for slavery, with the public cheering from the stands. The rodeo generates millions, but questions remain. Who benefits most? And at what cost? Labor in the fields. Angola still operates as a working farm. Inmates rise early. They work long hours. They harvest crops under armed supervision. Pay is minimal, often measured in cents per hour. Supporters argue this teaches discipline, provides structure, reduces idleness. Critics argue it continues a legacy. Men, overwhelmingly black, working the same land, under the same conditions, as those who came before them. Only the labels have changed. Modern reforms or modern control. Today, Angola promotes itself as a model prison. Educational programs, vocational training, faith-based rehabilitation. Violence statistics are lower. Media access is more controlled. But civil rights advocates warn, transparency is still limited. Oversight remains inconsistent. And accountability depends on who's asking. The brutality of the past may no longer be visible, but control, absolute control, remains. Why Angola still matters. Angola is not just a prison. It is a mirror. It reflects how America punishes, who it punishes, and how easily power can operate unchecked when society stops paying attention. Every reform came after exposure. Every improvement followed outrage. Nothing changed quietly. And the question Angola forces us to ask is not whether it is better than it was, but Whether a place built on suffering can ever truly be just, who gets to tell the story? Access to Angola is rare. Cameras are restricted. Interviews are supervised. Movements are controlled. What the public sees is curated. Journalists are guided along approved routes. Inmates selected for interviews are screened. Questions are monitored. Supporters argue this protects safety. Critics argue it protects image. Because the most damaging stories of Angola have never come from official tours. They came from letters, from court filings, from men who had nothing left to lose, and from families who kept asking questions long after the prison stopped answering. The families left outside. Angola sits far from major cities. For families, visiting can require hours of driving through rural Louisiana. For many, visits are rare. For some, impossible. Parents age. Children grow up. Relationships fade. Families speak of loved ones who slowly disappear, not through death, but through distance. And when something goes wrong inside Angola, families are often the last to know, if they are told at all, when death is paperwork. Over the decades, inmate deaths in Angola were often reduced to forms: natural causes, medical complications, unavoidable incidents, rarely investigations, rarely accountability. Only after repeated pressure did reporting improve. But advocates argue even modern transparency has limits, because once a system becomes accustomed to death, it learns how to process it efficiently. Permanent sentences, permanent damage. Psychologists have studied Angola's population extensively. The findings are consistent. Permanent incarceration changes the brain. Hope diminishes. Identity erodes. Time collapses. Men stop imagining futures. Instead, they adapt to routine, a routine that rarely includes meaningful autonomy. Even well-intentioned programs cannot fully offset the damage of knowing. This is it. Forever. Reform without release. Angola's reforms focus on managing life inside, not returning people to society. Education prepares inmates to teach others inside Angola. Skills are used to maintain the prison itself. For many lifers, rehabilitation has no exit. It simply makes incarceration more efficient. And that reality raises a difficult question. What does justice mean? When redemption has nowhere to go, the prison that refused to disappear. Many prisons close. Angola never will. Its size, its isolation, its population. It is too embedded in Louisiana's system. Entire communities depend on it for employment. Politicians avoid challenging it. Oversight fluctuates with public attention. Angola endures because it serves a purpose, a place to send those society no longer wants to think about. What Angola teaches U.S. Angola is often described as an exception, an extreme, but history suggests otherwise. It is what happens when punishment is prioritized over accountability, when isolation replaces transparency, when a system is allowed to operate without witnesses. Angola did not become corrupt overnight. It became corrupt quietly. And if Angola taught us anything, it's that cruelty does not require villains, only permission. The questions that never go away, even after reforms, even after lawsuits, even after decades of scrutiny. Angola leaves behind questions that refuse to fade. How many men were broken before anyone cared enough to look? How many deaths were accepted as routine? How much cruelty was labeled necessary simply because it was convenient? Official records tell one story, but institutions rarely document their own failures honestly. The truth often survives only in fragments, in testimonies, in court transcripts, in memories carried by men who never left. Justice or management. Angola today is frequently cited as an example of successful reform. Violence is lower. Programs are visible. The optics are improved. But critics argue this is not justice. It is management, a system refined to function smoothly, not one designed to heal. When rehabilitation does not lead to release, it becomes maintenance. When reform does not include accountability, it becomes branding. And Angola's past reminds us how easily systems confuse order with morality. The men who will die here, thousands of men currently inside Angola, will never leave. They know it. The system knows it. The public rarely thinks about it. They will age. They will weaken. They will be buried far from where their stories began. Some will be remembered by families, some by fellow inmates, many by no one at all. A prison sentence that outlives the person serving it raises a final, uncomfortable question. Who is punishment really for? Angola and the American conscience. Angola is not an outlier. It is a magnified version of a broader truth. When society demands punishment without limits, institutions will supply it. When oversight weakens, abuse follows. And when the public looks away, systems learn they can endure almost anything. Angola survived not because it was hidden, but because it was accepted. The land never forgot. The fields at Angola still stretch endlessly. The soil still carries history. Long before razor wire, long before cell blocks, this land absorbed suffering. Different names, different uniforms, the same power dynamic. The past never left Angola. It simply changed its form. A haunting end. Angola tells us what happens when punishment replaces justice, when isolation replaces accountability, when power goes unchallenged for too long. It is not just a prison. It is a warning. Because systems like Angola do not exist by accident. They exist because they are allowed to. And as long as places like Angola stand, quiet, distant, and normalized, the question remains. Not what kind of prison Angola is, but what kind of society needs it? If this documentary made you think, share it. If it made you uncomfortable, that's the point. And if you believe stories like this should never be forgotten, subscribe so we can keep telling them. Because silence is what allowed this to happen in the first place.